Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's live stream of Blabbit. We hope everyone is feeling wonderful after a festive holiday weekend, and we're ready to get back to it, knowing that there's yet another holiday right around the corner. So, everybody, as we have joked, everybody keep your stretchy pants close by. Okay. Well, for those of you tuning in for the first time, welcome. This is the platform where we stream every week and experts come and share their tips with us. Yes, it is a place where you get free access to experts in various areas of business. If you're tuning in for the first time, my name is Paul Geiger. I am a New York City public speaking coach and presentation expert, and I help people get clarity along with comfort and connection when they are interacting with others in business, which is all the time. Hey, Glenn.
Hey, Paul, how are you?
I'm good. And
Beautiful
you?
day.
Yeah.
Beautiful day. Hey, everyone. My name's Glenn Ingram. I've been working in teaching and helping people with sales for the better part of the last 2 decades. And sometimes it's hard for people to understand, but your best part of sales is asking questions. So this is what we're going to do here today. Ted, how are you this morning?
I am well, Glenn. Thanks for asking. My name's Ted Creighton, as you just mentioned. I'm glad to be here, guys. I've been excited about this all week because I've seen the way you guys roll, and very excited to talk about what we all do, and hopefully I can help be that expert that you were referring to, Paul. I'm a business coach in the Greater Toronto area here in Canada, and have been so for about the last 7 years. And we'll probably get into the discussion at some point about the fact that I am a recovering engineer. And so my background is a little bit left brain. So that's kind of interesting. And I work primarily with small, medium-sized businesses that just need to figure out what their next steps are to growth.
Okay. Well, thanks for being on the show and joining us here today, Ted. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
We often talk here on Blabbit about the challenges that we've all been going through. It's kind of a collective upheaval, a collective disruption.
Yeah.
So as we look forward in this last month of 2021 into 2022, what are some of the challenges, some of the common challenges that have always been there in front of business? And also, what are some of the more slightly different challenges that you see businesses facing right now? What are some of those biggest obstacles?
Sure. I'm going to make the assumption, I think it's pretty valid, that, here in Canada, we're seeing a lot of the same sorts of issues you are in the US. And, one of the biggest, I would call it opportunities versus challenges, is a lot of people will be getting back out there to connect with each other. So a lot of times over the last 20 months or so, one of the biggest issues was, how do we get in front of people? And typically the issue people ran into is can't get in front of them, can't talk to them. They don't go to the same events they used to. So trying to get in front of people was a challenge. Now the pendulum is going to swing somewhat back to the point where people will put themselves out there. People will get out to, for example, networking events more, association events, trade shows. So I think that's something people have to be mindful of. There still will be some reticence for certain people to get out, into public, but there's going to be more and more people trying to do that and get back as normal as they can. The other thing I'm seeing, and we've been talking about this a lot recently, is with the big resignation, whatever you want to call sort of the ability to attract and get people. I say this to clients, and I say this to pretty much everybody I know right now, is if you're thinking about growth next year, and you should be, think hard and fast about where your people are going to come from, because it's really, really challenging. The traditional ways of just posting and interviewing are probably not going to work. And if they do, you're not probably going to get the type of people you want. And so consequently, I think that's one of the bigger challenges going forward, is just going to be, don't be surprised if 2022 for a lot of people is going to be a pretty good year, sort of bouncing back from the pandemic. But if you don't have the people to support the additional business, that's going to be a little bit, it's going to be a big challenge.
Mhm.
Okay, well, I'm going to take a jump off the high dive here. So, as you're talking about what I see, some comments you have online about helping businesses get organized, get staged for growth, and stuff like that. Inevitably, I see businesses go through cycles where they get so mirrored in working in their business instead of on their business that they have a hard time growing because they're not planning, like you said, for the next move, next quarter, next half year, and what like that. So, what's the first thing you would do to talk with somebody to kind of explain to them how to focus on growth and still manage and run their business at the same time?
That's a really good question, Glenn. And it's funny because I was having a conversation with a few people this morning about almost exactly that point. Um, One of the issues, especially if it's an owner-managed business where they've been in the business for a few years, they're the ultimate doer. They're the ones that like doing the tinkering. They like working in the business. Getting them to work on the business can be a bit of a challenge until you get them to start thinking about, they're not necessarily the best at blank, whatever, it is that they do. They could be a digital marketer. They could be an attorney. They could be, any number of, they could make widgets, and trying to convince them that, listen, you can get people to do that for you. In fact, the value that you provide to your business is a lot greater than that individual task that you're currently still doing. A lot of people still like, surprisingly enough, in their businesses, they still like doing some of the administrative stuff and some of the day-to-day stuff because it brings them comfort and it gives them a certain sense of control. And to scale your business, you sort of, going back to the working on the business point, is you really got to start thinking, about how much time do I need to spend sort of looking forward, start anticipating the needs of the business, start thinking about where are those next people we were talking about before, where are those next people coming from? Because unless you start thinking, in terms of weeks, months ahead, you're not going to get any further ahead than you are right now. And so breaking people of that habit, and we talk a lot about habits, but breaking people of the habit of the day-to-day and the things that they traditionally like doing is one of the things I like working with clients on, because once you get them thinking in terms of other people, you can defer, delegate, or delete certain things, so that you can make up the time to work on your business. But you got to do that. Like, that's a critical task that you've got to do. Otherwise, you're never going to get where you want to go.
But it's kind of interesting. We've just come out of a time where there's been quite a bit of downsizing. So I can understand that the mindset is suddenly you have to be prepared to shift direction as opposed to bringing it down to where it needs to be, keep it lean and mean. Now you have to have enough space on the island for people to grow. So with that in mind, what are there any general things that you believe that people are looking for, potential employees are looking for at this time, in regard to just choosing one business or whatever their chosen field is, one company over another? In other words, what are they? Is there general criteria that they're looking for that they weren't necessarily getting before, or they need more of now?
I think I'll answer that in kind of two different ways, Paul, because I think there's sort of, what the employer is looking for and the employee is looking for. I think a lot of people on the employee side are looking for a certain amount of autonomy, in that the whole idea that everybody started working remotely was a good thing for certain people, like the idea that you could work from, a different time zone, or you could work from, a place that you would otherwise have to commute into work, is kind of interesting to people. Having a certain amount of flexibility with hours made a lot of sense to a lot of people. I ran into a lot of people throughout COVID where, their family situation sort of dictated that they were only around certain times because the kids were home, homeschooling, or they had parents living with them for whatever reason. And so that flexibility piece, I'll sort of couple that with, though, some people over the last 20 months or so have also found there's only a certain amount of isolation that they can take. So giving people some flexibility about, should I come into the office, or can I come into the office, or can I work remotely, gives them a certain amount of flexibility that they otherwise didn't have in the past, and they really like about the situation in the future. The challenge on the employer side is just, how do you ensure the productivity of people that you don't necessarily see each day? The other part of it is, how do you incentivize them to come in if it's not exactly what they're looking for? And I don't know if you guys are seeing it as much as we are here, but part of the issue a lot of employers are running into is people are finding that they're jumping ship and going elsewhere because they're being offered more money, because there's this big race to get good people, whatever the cost ends up being. So it's kind of a bit of a dance right now, and it'll be interesting, going into the new year, see where that settles out, because I think the talent piece is going to be critical, but trying to get that match, I think, is going to be hard on both ends, like on both sides of the equation.
Don't you really see that going into 2022 and maybe even into the next year? Because it doesn't matter if you're talking employees, if you're trying to purchase an automobile, purchase a house, you're seeing so much of a knee-jerk reaction society in the last 12 months of people, again, rushing in one direction without trying, kind of understanding what the path is and where the destination is going to take them. Don't you kind of see this whole thing kind of being ups and downs and a lot of peaks and valleys over the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think there is a certain transitory nature to the whole thing. I think what you're going to find is that to your point, I think there's a certain amount of, I'm going to call it fear. I don't know if it's really fear or, the old, FOMO, fear of missing out type of mentality, that if they don't sort of do that knee jerk and do something now, they're going to miss out completely on it. But I think you're right. I think sanity will finally, hopefully, prevail sometime next year. But, when that'll be is going to be, a bit challenging. But to that same point, because the other issue that some of my clients and some of the people I know are also dealing with is there's also some knock-on effects because of the pandemic, supply chain issues and things like that. Those will right themselves at some point as well. So then the question is going to be, what's the impact going to be in the near term? And then what's the longer term impact going to be? And it's hard to predict the future, but if you can at least give some thought to what it could be, then at least it'll help make certain decisions along the road.
Mm-hmm. I want to circle back for just a moment to something you said right in the beginning of the broadcast, which is your previous life, I'll use that term, was as being an engineer. Not that that ever leaves you, but please explain, and this is the point of my question, please explain for all of us how that informs the way that you coach. Because my understanding of coaching is a coach is really the person who is responsible for your accountability for doing the things that you need to do. Yes, the coach does guide,
Yes.
but also there's a certain amount of accountability. And you mentioned the left brain. I'm just wondering if that's something that makes it a little bit easier for you to see the obstacles, to structure what the possible solutions are, and then also to have a system of accountability for the individuals and the organizations that you work with.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question, because so if we go way back in the Wayback Machine, I have my undergraduate degree is in chemical engineering, and so I'm a process engineer by training. And one of the things, so for I'd say about 25, 30 years of my career, I was in manufacturing. So it was, various roles, including process engineering, production planning, supply chain, management, that sort of thing. And so a lot of things were very left-brained, a lot of things were very linear, a lot of things were X's and O's. I also have an MBA in finance and strategy, so that kind of helps too, as far as, what are the long-term impacts of whatever the business is doing. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that I found, and this sort of, as I got into doing what I'm doing right now, is despite I've got a pretty good left brain, I also, from a people standpoint, I really liked the team leadership piece. I liked helping people figure out how they could sort of, figure out how to do things on their own, how to come
Mhm.
together as a team to actually, meet the objectives of the organization or meet their own personal objectives. And I really got jazzed by that. And so consequently, the idea of going into coaching made a lot of sense because as I found out probably too late in life, is that I'm probably the antithesis of being an engineer. I've got a very high sort of extroversion factor, so I'm a high I on the disc profile, and so
Mhm.
consequently, I like people. I like seeing people actually succeed. And the one thing that I find in the way that I work with clients is I don't want to say there's always a right answer to things, but a lot of stuff, especially in business, is about process and is about systems and about plans. And what I find, not exclusively, but very often, is that it's not that people have bad plans, it's that people don't execute them particularly well.
Right.
So a lot of what I do is really coaching people on, okay, great ideas, great plan. Now, what are you going to do to actually execute on that and make sure that you're actually winning versus, just sort of going with the flow?
Yeah, and do you think, one second, Glenn, I have one more quick bite here, and that is, I know, uh, and that is the clarity. Do you find, and now we're going to compare notes a little bit, because Glenn and I have talked about this quite a few times about simplifying things and making the concepts really easy to understand, making the concepts easy to resonate with the people that you want to affect a change with. Do you find, and I have to keep reminding people, the concepts are simple, the concepts are easy, the execution is what's hard. And I know it's human nature when you can simplify something and put the structure there in front of someone and they go, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
But that's not the job. the
yeah.
job is then the execution is following through on those things, right?
It's funny because and Paul, you and I know some of the same people through LinkedIn and stuff, and I've learned over the years that we're just a creature of our own habits a lot of times. So a
Yep.
lot of times we know the right things to do, we just don't choose to do them. Or if we try and do them, we do them inconsistently, or we do them for a week and then sort of go on to something else.
Mhm.
And so, to your point, it's usually the little things done consistently make all the difference in the world. Um, and so, um, there's a book out there called The One Thing. So, what is the one thing you need to do? And the one thing that I find with that is that a lot of times it's just what are you doing consistently to sort of get things done so that incrementally over time you're actually, it's like compound interest, it's actually turning into something that's quite significant. So it doesn't have to be earth shattering, it doesn't have to be sort of the big thing, it just has to be something that you're doing on a consistent enough basis where you're going, you know what, I can start seeing the traction, I'm starting to see the needle move. And if you do that, that's far better than trying to hit the home run every time.
So for consistency, to get away from a 5-day business shelf life for an idea, and to make changes in your business from habits, kind of like going to a gym.
Mhm.
How do you coach people to say we need to do this for X amount of time and do it consistently to know if we have a win or if we need to tweak something, as opposed to just going off in different directions 3 or 4 times a month?
Oh, that was a great question. I don't know if you guys ever read the book the 12-week year. So the idea behind that is just, again, what are the things you need to do? You know, 12 weeks really is just a time period where you're measuring everything you do over a 12-week period. I really like taking clients through what are the things you need to do to get traction in your business over the next 3 months, 12 weeks, whatever it ends up being. And we scorecard it out so that it's done every day. If it's something has to be done every day, let's make sure you're doing it every day. And at the end of each day, Everybody's got to keep track of, did I go to a networking event? Did I follow up with people? Did I make those cold calls I say I was going to make? That sort of stuff. And then at the end of the week, when it's time to take score, then you start seeing, is it done? Isn't it done? And then if it's consistently done, because again, everybody said habits are built over, if you ask anybody, it could be 15 days, 20 days, 30 days, 60 days. Everybody has a different opinion on it. But at the end of the day, if you're doing something consistently enough, like you said, going to the gym, for example, it just will become a natural consequence of what you do. And so getting people to feel comfortable to really, and again, this is my left brain coming out, but keep track of individual activities over a certain period of time ingrains that in them, and then they start seeing the results. Once they start seeing the results, they're going, this is what I've been looking for, and then they keep doing it. A lot of people, unfortunately, try it for a week, 2 weeks, try it haphazardly, don't get the results, think that it's a stupid idea, and go back to doing what they used to be doing or doing something else. So getting people to do it over an extended period of time and doing the right things makes all the difference in the world.
But then even if you're doing the wrong things, at least after 3 months of consistently trying something that, like Glenn said, it needs to be tweaked. It needs to be adjusted.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Totally. Well, and this is the one thing, and again, to sort of further respond to Glenn's question, one of the things I want to do with clients is I'm a big proponent of KPIs. I'm a big proponent of numbers. I'm an engineer, for goodness sake. So, hopefully I like numbers. And keeping score is important, and keeping score just to see, again, is the needle moving? Are you winning? The needle isn't moving. Things aren't working the way you want, rather than, again, worrying about, okay, obviously something needs to be changed. What am I going to do about that? So it's just, you're getting the feedback telling you something's working, keep doing it, or it's not working. What should I do differently, and what should I tweak? And, what should I be expecting going forward if I do make those changes?
Well, and you mentioned KPIs. I think in the next year or so, like we were talking about, and I want to know your opinion on this, it's going to be imperative that you have those and focus on those versus some people that would just, walk by and make sure employees are at their desks. Because as you're doing a hybrid, as you're doing a remote type of employee, the only way to know what's going on are KPIs or something like that, instead of just knowing someone's sitting at their desk and it looks like they're working all the time. Yeah. So what do you envision for KPIs and different types of reporting and evaluating things as we go to a remote or a hybrid type of workplace?
That's an interesting question, because I think one of the things, again, I'm a big proponent of KPIs, whether it's financial productivity or otherwise. And I think for businesses, obviously, productivity is going to be, a big thing. And again, whether it's widgets per hour, whether it's, the amount of work output, whatever the measure of that is, per day is going to be, I think that's important. I've heard people talk about, which I'm not a huge fan of, but just, keeping track of people actually sitting in front of their computer and monitoring that as something. Like, I'm not a big fan of that. But certainly if you're in a service-based business, for example, attorneys are a good one, because they tend to now, there's a certain number of businesses that have decided, going to a less bricks and mortar and more of a virtual model makes a lot of sense. And I think they're right. The issue is, the metrics are still the metrics for lawyers. Utilization rate's the same. Billing rate is still the same. So how do you measure those things, which are traditional measures of output, in a different business model? And how is that going to work? Because the interesting thing is, in certain cases, especially from an efficiency point of view, if you're working in a virtual model, there's less back and forth as far as commuting. But again, you can't see what people are doing other than when the green light is on when they're on, on Zoom, or if the little light's on when they're on Microsoft Teams. So it's really hard to then say, okay, how do I know that those people are doing what they're supposed to be doing? until I measure their output. And again, it could be, cases per hour. It could be, again, could be billable hours, depending on the type of business.
Well, and one thing I would say with that is as someone that worked in an industry as they were going more remote and not being able to have some people to be able to have their thumbs on other people to watch things. It's, as Paul mentioned earlier, keeping these KPIs simple, because you don't want it to take 30 minutes to an hour a day for someone to give a report to you, because that's just 30 minutes to an hour a day that you lost to productivity.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good point. I think the other point to that too, Glenn, is that, in what I've seen, if there is an industry standard, let's say practice management type of software, or something that actually manages for you people's, or reports for you people's either productivity or sort of task completion, that sort of thing, and can spit that out in 30 seconds rather than 30 minutes, that's great. And again, I use the example, accounting firms, law firms do the same thing. They have software that can spit out productivity and realization rates and all that sort of stuff fairly easily.
Well, and as someone that's worked with remote workers for years, I can tell you, keeping that look on the computer and getting snapshots and all that stuff, all that does is take up more of my time to manage, as opposed to saying, I want this amount of work done. If you could do it in 4 hours or 8 hours, I don't care, as long as you get X accomplished. And I think it makes people more productive.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right on that.
Well, it motivates them, certainly motivate, because yes, I would love to have my work done in half the time that's expected, but get paid as if I had worked 8 hours. Absolutely. Let me ask you something, Ted. We're in the month of December right now. In terms of planning for 2022, is it ever too late to do that, to look at the first quarter, to look at the year in terms of planning? Or is it something that, and this goes back to, it's a two-part question. It's also, how do you guide someone to be able to clarify what their vision is? And is there, how do you determine whether their vision is big enough, whether they're willing to take enough of a risk, or whether they want to play it safe? And that could be a problem. So how do you get to that clarification? And I realize, again, as always, very loaded question, many variables there, but just
loaded is good.
Maybe walk us through your process for that.
Yeah, just to answer you the first part of that question, I think it's never too late. Obviously the best time to start planning is usually, I always call Q4 planning season, because you're really thinking, how am I going to end the year strong, and how am I going to start the following year really, really well. But obviously the next best time is whenever you decide that you need to do the planning. I run into a lot of people in January who are just going, you know what, I really had just an okay year last year. I really, really want to, hit the ground running this year. What do I need to do? Of course, you're a week, 2 weeks into the year, but again, you've still got 11 and a half months, let's say, in front of you, lots of time to get stuff done. I think your point about the vision part is really important, because, again, I'm a big proponent of the idea that, if you don't know where you're going to go, any road will take you there. And so just having an idea where people want to sort of drive the bus, like, do you want to be biggest, baddest, best? Do you want to sell your business in 3 to 5 or 10 years time? Do you want to be sort of the, preeminent company in your industry, like locally, statewide, nationally? Like, where is this going to go? Because it's really, again, when you think about it, it's going to color some of the decisions you make in year 3, 5, 7, 10, but it's also going to color what you do in the current year. And so, it's important to at least think that through as to where you want to go down the road. But then working that back, and again, I'm going to use the backwards engineering part and just say, so what does that mean for next year? So it's almost like you're taking, how did we do this year? What are, what the good, the bad, the ugly? What are the opportunities we see? What are the things we don't want to repeat? What are the things that probably are going to become issues for next year, sort of, from the past looking forward, and then from the future looking back, you're saying, but this is where we want to go. So we better start thinking about, adding, adding extra people because we're going to expand. We better start thinking about, if it's an equipment-based company, where are we going to get the financing? Where are we going to get the equipment from? That sort of thing. So it's kind of an iterative process. But the one thing I will say is, it's not something, once you sort of have that vision set, you're still going to have to revisit it periodically. But it's not something you have to revisit every week or every month. But it's just something that's guiding you at least in the right direction.
And don't you see a lot of times what businesses and people miss is doing the minute things? Here's my goal. Here's what I want to achieve. But what little steps am I going to take for small wins? They're going to make the big win easier.
Yeah. So one of the things I take people through usually, so goal setting it's funny. Goal setting is one of those things that I find, like project management, the devil's in the details sometimes, like you say, Glenn. Because a lot of times what they'll do is to say, yes, this is a goal I have for next year. Here's some of the things I need to do, but then doing the real sort of breakdown, like, the work breakdown as to, okay, what are the things I need to do to make that happen? Who are the people I need to involve to also make that happen? What resources am I going to need and when to make sure that that actually takes place? And so you're right, getting down to enough detail so you can execute, but not, certain minute details have to be addressed by somebody, but it doesn't mean you've got to have a list as long as your leg to execute on something. But you at least have to know how you're going to get from A to B. And I think a lot of times what people do is they focus on the outcome. Yes, I want the outcome. I want it by such and such a date. But then the actual process to get there is kind of we'll figure it out as we do it.
I asked that because a little story, our first year in business, I know my wife came to me in January or so when she was doing taxes, said, do you know what we did this first year? And I remember looking at her and said, I hit my weekly goal. If I was behind 1 week, I caught up the next. She goes, no, how much did you over the whole distance? I said, I don't know, but I focused on my weekly goal and we always met that. She goes, yes, I'm trying to tell you, this is what we did. I'm like, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was focused on smaller numbers. And when you make the small numbers, the big numbers win as well.
Yeah. And I think that brings up a really good point too, because I think a lot of times, people tend to focus too much on the outcome and not on the individual metrics to get there. So, the whole concept of leading versus lagging indicators is just, there's certain things that if you're doing the right things and doing those consistently and measuring those a long time, like you say, the result will come. But a lot of people are just going, hey, I need to make 50 grand this month. And that's all they think about, not thinking about, okay, if I backwards plan it, how many meetings is that with people? How many people do I have to reach out to? And making sure that the plan is executed well so that the result is, where you expected it to be.
And what you said before, Ted, made me think about the idea that often when we need to get in place to follow through on this plan can be people who are not necessarily our direct reports or our resources. In other words, I was thinking of an example that if part of your goal was to get into partnerships with company A, B, and C, and maybe only one of those companies decides within the time frame that you've envisioned that they're going to work with you, is it counterproductive or is it prudent to have a plan B and a plan C as opposed to the plan A? Because there are variables that go into things. And I understand, you need to have a good pipeline, you need to have options there. But when you really focus your energy on something that is out of your control, not someone who's an employee, but someone who you would like to do business with that would really take you to where you need to go, what do you advise then? Do you advise stick to plan A, have variables? Is that something that's already baked into the planning for the new year?
Oof. It's kind of a loaded question because one of my previous lives, I was actually, I looked after contingency and disaster planning for an organization. And so you're always worried about the plan B and you're always worried about the, if A fails, then what do you do? So I think the answer to that one is, if something's mission critical, you might want to think about, okay, if A doesn't work, then, what am I going to do? Or do I have a couple options? So for example, if you're looking at bringing in, I'll just pick, say, a digital marketing company. You really want to sort of bump up your presence online. You want to get certain things done by a certain date. And you vetted these people, they're great and everything else. And then for whatever reason, things fall off. I always say to people, find a couple of alternatives. Again, if something's mission critical, if you've, gone out to tender, or if you've decided I'm going to vet, 3 or 4 providers, and of, let's say, of the 4, 2 of them, it's like 1 and 1A, then that's good. If one really stands out and the others are crap, then that's a bit of an issue. But I think you're always mindful of that, because I have seen in the past where people put all of their energy into a person, or an agency or a provider of some sort, and then for whatever reason they just either haven't delivered or they just haven't come to the table, and that puts people behind for the year. So if it's mission critical, and that if it's in the way of you actually achieving, let's say it's a revenue goal, that's problematic. Same thing if you want to bring somebody on as partnership for something in the organization. Let's say you're trying to bring on another line of business, but instead of doing it yourself, you partner with somebody else. If that person doesn't obviously fit in, then it's, where do I find the next person that will be able to fill that role? That kind of makes sense, like that.
It does, but it just brings up an interesting point, which is, in business, we're talking about stay with the plan and take the steps and follow through. And then when the variables kick in, you've got to be aware and recognize when there needs to be an adjustment and move to the possibility of a plan B. And I just know from my experience, very often I will, just like Glenn, know what I need to do along those steps. And sometimes when I pick my head up, I realize that there needs to be a little bit of an adjustment along the way. So just my experience. Mm-hmm.
Well, and don't you find that, as we see most times we've been talking, Paul, that it's all about communication? Like you talk about your communication with that marketing company or someone like that. When you're creating new relationships, it's over communicate at the beginning will lead to fewer problems over the long haul. When you address smaller problems, you don't have to deal with larger problems and stuff like that. So don't you feel that communication is key with all these things we're kind of talking about there?
Yeah, I think communication, I think an alignment too, because I think communication is just, are we on the same page? Do we share the same values on certain things? I find a lot of times people will, it's almost like bringing on employees. They'll bring in a third party, or they'll bring somebody in because they check the boxes as far as their capabilities, but as far as their values and the way that they deal with clients can be totally offside. And yet they don't really thoroughly vet that part out. And part of that's the communication, and part of that's just understanding the processes that people actually use. And a lot of times that's to their detriment, because people think anybody can do, again, fill in the blanks, whatever that ends up being. But the problem is, and this is a very unscientific number I'm going to throw at you, but probably 5 to 10% of people out there will align with the values that you have as a business owner. And so trying to find those people, and it's the same as, if you're in a networking type of environment, it's really hard, because it takes communication, it takes understanding, it takes asking good questions about, so how do you handle your clients? How do you work with clients when, things are going well, when things aren't going so well? How are we going to make sure that, our needs are prioritized over, other needs? And how do we communicate that? And if you can do that, that's great. But I find, to your point, it takes some effort, and it takes a bit of work.
Well, and here's what kind of astonishes me from time to time, and my wife keeps saying I shouldn't be surprised, but it's the amount of people that will jump into that relationship that is no different as a work relationship than from a relationship with your spouse or with someone like that. So we'll jump into business with somebody in a day when we would never get married in a day. So when you talk about having like traits, having, similar beliefs and stuff like that, I think it's imperative that you take some time to date, get to know somebody before you jump into a business relationship, because inevitably, if you don't, you're going to find out that you don't have similar backgrounds, similar ideals, and that's never a very good working relationship.
No, in fact, that's usually, I think you're right. I think if you trace back, some of the bad relationships or the way things, sort of went off the rails, a lot of times it can be traced back to never really fully had a discussion about how we'd work together in the first place. So one of the things that, and again, I've been doing what I'm doing now for almost 7 years now. And what I found is that, in the whole networking and sort of relationship building world, there's no shortcut to sort of getting to know people, and there's no shortcut to understanding, who's a good person to refer business to, and vice versa. Like, again, it's not just, can you provide insurance, let's say, to people. It's, how do you treat your clients? How do I make sure that you're being honest with not just me, but also with, the other people you're serving? Again, what happens when, let's say something goes wrong in a client situation, you've got to fall on the sword. Like, how is that going to work? And so that takes time to sort of flesh all that out. But at the end of the day, it's worth it, because, you at least know you can trust them to take your best interest forward.
Mm-hmm. Now, our guest 2 weeks ago, Pamela, was saying, not in these exact words, but she did say that very often the clients that she works with have tried to go it alone and have tried to do the sorts of things that she coaches, the sort of things, the sort of advice that she gives. Do you find that that is the same sort of thing, that there's usually that there's a confusion or a sense of, I need help to do this? Or do you find a lot of your clients just have enough foresight to realize that I could use somebody along the way? In other words, she used the reference, I'm usually the last house on the block. In other words, they've tried a bunch of other things and now they come to me. So, and trust me, I go through this a lot myself, where
Sure.
people just believe, like with Glenn, oh yeah, we could do marketing, we can do websites, we could do this, we can do that. No, not as well,
No, not
certainly.
really.
Same sort of thing. Oh, I know how to give a speech or a presentation. Sure.
Sure.
Okay. As long as it's working out great for you. But if not, then bring in eyes and ears on the outside. Same thing for you, Ted.
Yeah, what's interesting, and I learned this, talking to people who are, in my corporate life, talking to corporate trainers, where they're saying, you can teach people to do things. So, it's the old, I'm aware of what I need to do, but if people actually do it is a different story. So people say, well, yeah, I sort of read that in a book, or, what, I took a course on blank, whatever that is. And I find, and this is just human nature, the execution, and going back to what we were talking about earlier, execution and consistency is different from the know-how, and the know-how to do are two different things. And I'd say the know-how to do is the part that people struggle with, because they do need the help. They do need the, somebody sort of, again, like any coach in sports, correcting here and there, holding the hand, but also holding, people accountable. And so when you think about it, when people say, people say this, probably you guys as well, is, no, I'm good. Statistically speaking, 80% of people probably aren't, or aren't as good as they think. And I remember reading something a while back where they're saying, and again, this goes back to the whole thing around DISC profiles and sort of personality trait assessments and things like that. Because one of the things is, they said, I think it was 23% of people are very self-directed. You tell them to do something or how to do something, and they'll do it. The remainder, the 75 to 77% or whatever, are, along a spectrum of, I probably can figure it out if I really focus on it, to, I don't have a chance. And so what you realize is, the vast majority of people do need some help. they just have a hard time asking for it or understanding, what help is going to look like and how it's going to actually manifest itself.
We all do.
Yep.
Well, and
You do.
in the last year, it's been a lot of self-realization for myself. So I think if you're working, whether it be with employees or with contractors, don't you think it's imperative to kind of identify which traits you're working with? Because if you don't, then you're probably going to be you're definitely not going to be near as productive with anyone you're working with. If you have that person that can take direction and follow, they're great. But if you're then asking them to kind of go into a management role and manage others, a lot of times that doesn't work very well. As opposed to the guy that you say, hey, this is what I want you to do. And they come back and say, well, this is how we should do it. Well, that's not how I told you. And they say, but no, this is a better way because we've done X, Y, Z. Those traits are valuable too, but they're not going to plow through and just get numbers done. So how do you kind of evaluate those different types of personalities to try and help people set their best foot forward to have their best chance for success?
Well, I think it's a good question in that part of it is what kind of role is that person in. The other part of it, and I do this a lot, and I think a lot of coaches and consultants do same. Again, when you do the sort of the personality assessments or the the communication style assessments, like a DISC profile or Myers-Briggs or any of those sorts of things, you want to understand sort of do they align? So if you're asking somebody to be very task oriented, is that the way they want to work? And are those the expectations you put on them? So as long as those line up, it's fine. Consequently, if you've got people who are more blue sky thinkers, and they're great ideas people, don't put them in something that's really task oriented and process oriented because they'll just fail completely. And so I find a lot of times with entrepreneurs, the entrepreneurs tend to be the really excited, blue sky thinkers in a lot of ways, or they're the tinkerers that love sort of, doing the nuts and bolts stuff. But the process and the systems and sometimes even the people part is not what gets them excited. And so there are people who just say, you know what, I'll take the business only so far, but then after that, I'm either going to leave it the way it is, or I'm going to sell it off and start something else because I like sort of the initial growth part and the excitement of building something, but turning it into sort of a business with all the bells and whistles to it isn't something that really gets them excited.
Now, something that I've been working with, you work with leadership teams. You don't just work with individuals, obviously. So you're working with groups. But let's talk a little bit more about communication, about making sure that, do you see any kind of a disconnect that's occurring now more than before between C-suite initiatives and leadership teams and management teams getting the message right? In other words, that old telephone game of, well, this is what I wanted you to do. Are they following through on that clarity? It's one thing to have your clarity of your own vision, but a whole nother thing to be able to communicate that clearly to everyone so that the marching orders are pretty much followed.
Yeah, I had the luxury for a number of years to work with some large organizations that were particularly good at sort of cascading sort of the strategic imperative or the strategic intent for the year, to every level, so that there was a certain amount of cohesiveness between, goals and objectives and activities for departments and individuals. But I find for smaller and medium-sized businesses that if they haven't sort of seen that kind of approach, they find it really challenging. In that, to your point, people kind of know where they want to go, but I think it was like Glenn was saying earlier, sometimes the way you see it and the way that you communicate it might be two different things. And so trying to get that cohesive, clear, this is where we're driving the bus, so here's where everybody's going to align themselves, can be really, really challenging, because it's, if you don't have the clarity of thought at the more senior level, it's going to be pretty messy at the middle and lower levels too. And so really and I know sometimes the word clarity is kind of overused but it's so critical, especially, when you're talking about goals, objectives, and just direction, that you got to get that part right so that it's really, like you guys were saying earlier, it's really simple for people to go, I get it, I understand it, I see where I fit in, and this is how I'm going to support.
Do you think that that becomes the bridging gap between varying communication styles? We just briefly touched on that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Communication styles don't always align. They don't. But still, there can be a working relationship as long as there is some sort of understanding that that is what could be going on rather than an inefficiency in some other area. It's just simply the way that they go about communicating what they're thinking, what their aspiration is, and what their method of getting it done is. So does that become, I agree. We hear the word clarity, but I saw Glenn shaking his head and I thought the same thing. Can't get enough of it, because is that clarity the bridge between different communication styles?
Well, don't you guys find, because one of the things I find is, at the end of the day, sort of, facts are facts. And if you can say, specifically, this is where we're going to go and this is what we're going to do, whether you're a very directive style, whether you're a very participative style, whether you're, again, whatever personality you are, the message is going to be the same. It's going to be, this is where we're going. This is how, you can get involved. These are the sorts of things that are going to measure whether we actually win or lose. But trying to get people around that, because I was always amazed when you would get, again, executive group, when you get 5-10 people around the table and you say, okay, what's the most important thing for us to achieve, in the next 12 months? You might get 10 different answers. Or, what's the biggest thing you're working on today, Paul, that's going to move the needle for the organization so that by the end of the year, we're going to be bigger, faster, stronger. And what you're doing might not align with what Glenn's doing. And so, that part is, I always find that really, really interesting, because it might be 3 or 4 people actually creating the, here's where we want to go, but then communicating that to the other people can be really, it can be a challenge, but it's got to be done, because otherwise everybody's going to go off in a whole bunch of different directions.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what we've talked about in the past, Paul. You have ideas up here, but you don't have clarity disseminated down through middle management, down to people executing. Or you have a plan up here, and you have people in middle management that may not have that engineering or that left brain understanding of numbers. And I've seen this in the past where our goal is to have this much revenue. Well, that means we're going to have so much retention, so much loss, so much increase, so much new business and stuff like this. And they don't understand that if my increase goal isn't taking into account the 20% of the business I'm going to lose, then I'm setting myself up to fail every time when I am trying to expand my relationships with current clients based on this number. When I'm losing 20% out the back door, it should actually be maybe 40% higher to have that 20% net.
Yeah. And we basically have now gone full circle, because I just thought of what you brought up right in the beginning, Ted, about the Great Resignation, which is communicating all of these ideas, but still being able to communicate not so much that, yes, the clarity of the directive is there, but employees understanding that they have room for growth, they can make an impact, but yet they will still maintain some autonomy. There's the tender balance for 2022.
Yeah.
Yes? Yeah.
Totally. And I think the part of that is trying to, again, get people to buy into it and go, you know what? A, it's the right thing to do. B, it's going to get us, organization where we want to go. And a lot of times people are incentivized also, if we hit all of those particular milestones or goals, there's something in it for them. So, like the whole thing is around, getting people motivated, getting them understanding how they fit in. And as long as they understand, what the greater good is, going forward, then that's good. A lot of times, again, I've seen where people will sort of throw stuff out there to people and say, okay, we're going to do all of these things in the coming year. And then the only way they find out if they're doing okay is maybe once a quarter, they'll get an update saying, hey, we're doing well on this and we're doing crap on these other 3 things. And they're going, oh,
Right.
didn't know there was anything going on with those, things over the last 3 months.
Right.
Well, I think we probably each have 20 or 30 more questions, Paul. Unfortunately, somehow this hour has expired on us. I don't know how that happens.
No way. Already?
Yes. It just flows down the river, and it's a mighty river at that.
I
All
think
right.
Ted
Well,
may have hypnotized us and it just flew by real quick.
all right. Well, Ted, thank you so much for being our guest here on Blabbit. And for anyone who wants to get and needs to get in touch with you, what is the best way to do that?
So easiest way probably is either connect with me on LinkedIn, Ted Creighton. It's easy to find. There's not too many Ted Creightons out there, or just email me at tcreighton@focalpointcoaching.com. Easy
Awesome.
peasy.
Well, thank you very much. This has definitely been a fun hour, and we may have to kind of twist Ted's arm to come back in the future, Paul.
I'll plan on that for 2022.
That'd be awesome.
See, I like the way you're already planning for next year.
There we go. All right.
Thanks
Everyone,
a lot, guys.
thank you for tuning in. Everyone watching this replay, keep watching. Keep watching for Blabbit every Friday. We do the live stream here on LinkedIn and Facebook. And we'll see everyone again real soon.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.